What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk to you about SoFi. I want to go over some expectations for this upcoming week, what might cause some volatility in the stock price, and go over everything else that you need to know. But first, make sure to hit that thumbs up, and with that, let's get right to it. So starting off this upcoming week, we have a lot of big data points. JOLT numbers, GDP, also PCE, so that is coming out Tuesday and Wednesday. Thursday, ISM manufacturing, current forecast is 47.2, so getting close to that 50 mark. Anything above 50 shows more of an expansion occurring in the broader market. Flip side, anything below that shows more of a contraction. And so far, it's been somewhat lagging the last couple of reports of this. So once again, the market's really going to be kind of moving because of these. And then Friday, you have non-farm payroll and unemployment. Aside from that, you do have a lot of big companies unveiling their earnings this week. So Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, a lot of big tech names. And then, of course, you have yours truly Tuesday before the market does open. Current forecast for that is 3 cents for the earnings per share, 738.91 million for the revenue. Then over the last 90 days, you do have 0 positive and 9 negative revisions to the earnings per share. Looking at it on a little bit more of a deeper scale, so that 3 cents does equate to 64.4% year-over-year growth. 3 cents the low, 4 cents the high. And then for the revenue, 730 the low, 749 the high, and that does represent the consensus of 738, 27.36% year-over-year growth. But in my opinion, I think it's kind of more of an understanding that SoFi sooner or later will announce crypto, and I think that in among itself will cause a huge domino effect for the following quarters for the revenue. So at the end of the day, they might have some very good future guidance to give for this upcoming earnings. But nonetheless, though, leading up to that, so Monday, I do anticipate at least a very good green day for SoFi. Then aside from that, though, you might have just historically it sells off. So it is rather frustrating regardless of the results. SoFi just leads, kind of runs up, has FOMO, and then it just sells off, as you can kind of see based on here. So going into this upcoming earnings, 10.59% is that implied move. So roughly $1.50 in either direction is anticipated. So just kind of keep that in mind. The last roughly 4 earnings, the market has really taken the earnings as a negative, as you can kind of see under this column right here, the 2-week move. So last earnings, ultimately it went down 16.8. Last, or I guess the previous one to that, which was on October the 29th, it did go up 26%. That's at the 2-week mark, but immediately from their earnings, it did go down 6%. Then down 11% and down 11. So nonetheless, though, I think that it's just a lot of manipulation at the end of the day, because their growth is like next level. So huge member growth, and I think based on what I brought up in the last couple of videos and what's floating around on social media, it is fair to assume that the member growth is probably around that 800-ish. So we'll have to wait and see what does come from that, but I feel as though that is going to be kind of record levels. And of course, with that being said, that does mean product growth and deposits will all go up in accordance with that. So I think their earnings should do fairly well. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens from that. Going into this week, though, 13.55% of the free float is being shorted. Works out to be 145.98 million shares. Cost to borrow minimum is back at being positive, so that's always a good thing to see. And ultimately, it does show on Friday shorts increasing 7.63 million shares. That isn't necessarily correct, only because on the 25th, you did have the NASDAQ disclose a true amount of shares being shorted. So ultimately 146.78 million shares. And so that does mean that between March the 31st and April the 15th, shorts did increase roughly 7.5 to 8 million more than what we previously thought of, and most of the actual transactions would have occurred during the dark pool. So this is why I always bring up where the volume does come from. So there was a couple big transactions even on Friday though. So 21.9 million that was done at 328. night. 1.6 million shares for that transaction, 2.5 million. And so yeah, a lot of big transactions, a lot of big money has really been paying attention to SoFi with based on the options last week, with it closing exactly at $12.88. Had a huge solid day. That does mean that the 1250 strike prices and below all are technically in the money. So you had 16,000 at that 1250, 16,000 at that 12, and then 12,000 at that 1150, and so forth. So at the end of the day, there's about 3+ million shares that do need to be covered, and so most likely that should cause a nice bump up in the price come Monday, as market makers don't have obviously a lot of volatile stocks such as SoFi in their inventory. So that means that they do have to go to the open market. So that could really kickstart SoFi's week off fairly well. One thing to take note of though, with it at 1288 trading between this R1 and the pivot, so 1246 is going to be a strong support, and then 1401 is going to be the next strong target / resistance. So same as what I mentioned last weekend, I feel like the risk versus reward is definitely in favor of a lot more upside, because essentially you have Trump as well coming out saying that there is going to be a lot of deals coming very, very soon, meaning you could see also that push the broader market kind of higher at the same time as everything else I mentioned with data points, companies unveiling the earnings. So with that said, leading into the earnings, I can see realistically this R1 possibly being touched. Then dependent on everything else, you could see it closing between this R2 and this R1. But like I've kind of stated in the past, regardless of the results, you see just the market really taking a crap with SoFi's earnings for whatever reason. So again, if history does repeat itself, you could see a little bit more of a pullback, roughly like 10%, give or take, which is kind of in line with the implied move. But I feel like that would be a huge buying opportunity, same as pretty much any of the other previous earnings. So again, take that with a grain of salt, of course, but a couple of things to take note of. So you might see a new rating coming out on Monday. Doesn't logically make sense to have a new rating coming out the day before the actual earnings itself, but there's crazier things that have happened. So most likely you will see some craziness happen, but regardless, we will have probably about 10 new ratings this week, as analysts will be looking very closely at SoFi's actual earnings and kind of digesting what that means for the foreseeable future. But a couple of things to take note of though, because of the good Thursday and Friday that we did have, and even I guess prior to that though, it was able to close above that 50-day moving average. So $12.48 is going to be a key point to really watch for. And honestly, I don't see that being touched. And historically, again, it's kind of a weird scenario that SoFi is closing above the 50-day moving average leading into the earnings, because 50-day moving average typically does mean that you will have like a 30% swing, but earnings usually will signal that you have more of a pullback. So you kind of have conflicting things. So we'll have to wait and see what does prevail. But 1409 is that 100-day moving average. That's going to be a key point to watch for as well. And then that 200-day moving average at $11.64. So you never know. Earnings might take it back down to that 200-day moving average, or potentially the technicals and just broader markets momentum could continue to push it to this 100. But as I've stated in the past, I think SoFi and just honestly every stock in the market right now, it's very, very difficult to call the bottom and whatever. So I think just if you believe in a stock, it's profitable. I think that's the key takeaway, is you need to find profitable stocks given the market circumstance. Just dollar cost average. That's the best way to do it. Again, it's near impossible, because the problem is when this was selling off and it was getting to like that $9 range, you had a lot of people predicting that 6 was going to come. Well, those people are still waiting, and if they would have bought at that 9 or even at $10 ranges, they'd be up a significant amount, right? So it's all about just perception in the broader market. So let me know your thoughts. Throw your price predictions in the comments below. I do feel that this earnings might be different from the previous, and it will actually hold on to its gains, as well as the broader market will continue to push it higher. So I feel like post earnings, it will trade between this R3 and this R2. I feel like I'm like fairly realistic out there. I'm never out there saying that SoFi is going to get to $100, $200. I see a lot of other individuals that have done that, saying that SoFi is going to be like $45, $100 by the end of 2025. I don't see that being feasible, but that being said, I feel given the circumstances between this R3 and this R2 is fairly realistic. So let me know your general thoughts on SoFi, on the broader market. Have you been buying? Have you been selling? What's your general viewpoint on all of that? One final thing, pop over to my Patreon. I give buy signals on stocks, options, crypto, many of which have been absolutely on point. So definitely worthwhile to pop over there and take a look. With all that, appreciate all of you watching.